Hello, everybody. This is Tosca at NGO Soul+Strategy. And today I'm recording from an unusual location in the Netherlands, my original home country. And I'm going to talk with a really interesting and thoughtful young Extinction Rebellion climate change activist. So let me introduce it. In the last 5 years or so, we've seen the rise of often youth-led climate change activist networks that have chosen to engage in more, air quotes, radical forms of civic agitation, activism, non-violent civil obedience. Examples are, of course, Extinction Rebellion, particularly in Europe and UK, and the Sunrise Movement in the US, as well as groups like the Pan-African Climate Justice Alliance, for instance, and many others. Some, such as Extinction Rebellion, and I'm quoting Wikipedia here, they, quote, aim to instill a sense of urgency for preventing further climate breakdown. And so a number of activists in Extinction Rebellion and other similar movements accept that they will be arrested, will be imprisoned sometimes, and they accept and they often use mass arrest tactics. Extinction Rebellion has been criticized by some as, air quotes, environmental fanatics who risk alienating thousands of potential supporters. Activists identifying with Extinction Rebellion and other similar movements have also defended causing property damage because they say sometimes that such tactics are sometimes necessary and that they are careful not to put any person at risk. One side in a current hot debate between the different forms of radical activism believe that, quote, a relatively small group of people can bring an escalation in provocative direct action to keep momentum going. But the other side thinks that, quote, the goodwill and moral high ground that we achieved should be used instead to build a much broader public movement. And that's the trade-offs that I would like to talk in today's podcast. As part of our series of podcast episodes on how some international NGOs feel the need to rethink their campaigning strategy and tactics in order to be more effective, I've long been interested in this classical discussion on the trade-offs between engaging in high-profile, disruptive and contentious campaigning techniques and the value of focusing instead on building a broader public platform for support of issues. And today, after this long introduction, I am interviewing Koos van Est, a 20-year-old activist at Extinction Rebellion in the Netherlands, my original home country. Koos is very involved primarily locally and occasionally indirectly nationally in the Netherlands, and she speaks today in our podcast episode to both those tactics, those strategies, and how Extinction Rebellion, from her perspective, thinks about these trade-offs that I just mentioned. And Koos also happens to be the daughter of my niece, and which makes this interview extra fun for me. So lastly, to say that in a complementary podcast episode to this one, I will interview Asim Prakash and Nivas Dolsak, two academics based in the US who track climate change campaigner practices closely, to hear them out as well about these same trade-offs. So look out for that episode in one of the upcoming episodes. But now to you, Koos. You're so welcome.
Hi, it's very nice to be here. Thank you for inviting me. Excited.
I'm excited too. I'm just so jazzed about interviewing you. So listeners, let me give a brief bio. Koos is a student at Erasmus University College, which is based in Rotterdam in the Netherlands, where she studies illustration as well as liberal arts and sciences with a major in humanities. And Koos has also been involved in Extinction Rebellion quite actively for the last year or so, for about half a day per week. So Koos, let's start with a little bit of introduction. Tell me how you came to be quite active in Extinction Rebellion. Why did you decide to do that?
So it was actually one of my friends from high school who at the end of high school got very involved with climate activism and also political. She joined the political Green Party and then Extinction Rebellion in Utrecht. And then we both started studying in Rotterdam, and she immediately got very active within that local group. And I was kind of watching from the sidelines, and she was inviting me sometimes. And I think the first thing I joined was an art making day where I just like paint banners. And then immediately I felt the atmosphere was so nice. Like all the people were very open and welcoming. And it's just very nice to be with people who see the world in a similar way as you do and want to fight for the same cause as you do.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So let me jump with you into a couple of these. Activism is not easy because while the activism can be about a single cause, in this case, how to fight climate change and promote the best possible mitigation against climate change, there are lots of other interests and stakes that we have to balance as well. So, as you know, environmental activism is important, but so is environmental justice as well as equity concerns, and now more than ever. People who are lower in terms of socioeconomic class and status or who face discrimination are often hit harder by the very effects of climate change. So how, in your observation, does Extinction Rebellion try to both work on climate change action while also recognizing that there are justice elements to this?
I think in this conversation it's interesting to introduce the term climate justice, because I think that term encompasses the idea that all of these struggles are connected, like the climate crisis, racism, sexism, any other forms of isms or discriminations or oppression. They're all rooted in the same system, and therefore you can't really fight one without fighting the others simultaneously. So within Extinction Rebellion, the Netherlands, we've introduced, we have Extinction Rebellion as a global movement has 3 demands. But then we introduced demand 0, which is the demand for climate justice. And we called it demand 0 rather than demand 4 because it is the basis of all the other demands. It's what comes before all the other demands. And
interesting. Demand 0, you call that, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's like the foundation you said for the other demands.
Yeah, because the other demands are like tell the truth and let citizens decide and stuff like that. But you need climate justice. I guess it's simultaneously the base of what we want, but also the main goal.
The main goal. That makes sense. Yes. Now, as you know very well, there have also been critiques over many years that environmental advocacy and activism, including that, by the way, undertaken by mainstream environmental groups, whether it's WWF or Greenpeace or any of the other big environmental NGOs, that they, for a long time, these groups have been dominated by white upper middle class liberals, and thus that environmental activism has often suffered from white elitism. That the environment, in other words, was mainly something that citizens cared about once most of their other needs, particularly their material needs, were met. Is that criticism justified in your observation?
I think in certain ways it is. Also because activism, like to be able to do activism means you are in a often means you're in a very privileged position, because you are able to make the time for it, and you have enough financial support and people around you that support you, probably to be able to do that. Though in other cases, activism can also be a kind of necessary for survival, or feel as a necessity because you're being oppressed. So there's like privileges and oppression going on at the same time, I guess. Wait, what was the question again? I'm losing.
Oh, I'm actually going to reshape my question now into a follow-up question. So the question was, if that is true, that there has been a history of white upper-class liberals, basically, who were most active in all kinds of environmental activism, not just on climate change. And I'm talking decades ago, right? Actually, that criticism has already been in place for about 100 years in some ways. But if that is the case, Koos, how does Extinction Rebellion at the local level, where you're so familiar with the movement, how does it try to make it a more inclusive movement from the perspective of class, as well as race and ethnicity?
I think first and foremost, there's this culture of really accepting or embracing where everyone is coming from, and every individual is seen as very valuable in their own way, and however they may contribute. Like maybe someone just wants to cook the community dinners, and that's amazing, and another person wants to go into a lock-on and be arrested, or I don't know who really wants that, but like is ready to do that.
Is willing to accept that.
Yeah, exactly. And all of those contributions are valuable. And yeah, I think there's just this culture of inclusion, and we try to be welcoming to everybody and be aware, and also when something happens that's not inclusive or something, try to correct each other in that and learn from each other. And it's also okay if you make mistakes or you get things wrong or you don't understand something, as long as you're open to incorporate that feedback and change.
Okay. Does this ever lead though, despite all these best intents, right, of wanting to be intentionally inclusive, openness towards making mistakes and correcting those, etc. Does this particular issue, does this ever lead to conflict or tension, or not really in your experience at the level of a city like the activism in Rotterdam as a city?
I mean, I think there's not that much conflict. Perhaps sometimes things do arise on a more personal level, and of course we are part of the system, right, that has raised us all in certain ways and conditioned us socially. For example, raised men differently from people raised as women. Like for as an example, dynamics are still present in our group, and the only thing we can do is be aware of them and try to tackle them and subvert them. But you can't avoid that perhaps sometimes men will be more inclined to take up space in the room than women are, for instance.
Yeah. In fact, it's funny that interesting that you say that, because there is quite a bit of research over a couple of decades that some social movements are very there's a lot of machismo in it around kind of a cowboy mentality, especially when it comes to radical activism. But let me move on. So we all know, of course, the great example of Greta Thunberg, the well-known Scandinavian climate change activist. And recently, I saw an article in which she decided to side with indigenous people in Scandinavia who were pushing back against the need for more wind farms as a way of contributing to renewable energy. So that makes campaigning then even more complicated, right? So on the one end, social movements like Extinction Rebellion, I imagine, obviously want to promote more renewable energy. But on the other hand, if indigenous peoples in certain localities say, we don't want wind farms, as an example, how does, from your observation, how does a movement like Extinction Rebellion try to balance those two concerns at the same time?
I'm not sure how exactly Extinction Rebellion as a whole movement sees this, because it's a movement with just that's made from different individuals, and each individual will probably have a different stance on this. Perhaps there might be people that say, no, but we need the wind farm, so we need to go for that, and other people that say, no, we need to listen to what indigenous people are saying. From my personal perspective, I would be more on that side and like side with Greta Thunberg, I guess, because I think indigenous peoples are essential also to achieving climate justice, and the knowledge that they have, and the knowledge that they have about nature and the way they live together with it, that's extremely valuable, because in a way I think we need to move towards that as a society, like being more in connection with nature again. And also I think the change that needs to happen is not only that we need more renewable energy, but also that we need to just cut down our production of useless stuff. Like we just need to stop growing. Like this idea that we should just, all the energy that we're using now and that we're getting out of fossil fuels, that we should just replace that with wind and sun, and then all will be fine and we can just keep growing as an economy, whatever that is. I think that's something to be critical of, because this growth is just not feasible. Like we have limited resources, and I think we should just also produce less and use less energy. And I think
Yeah.
That
makes sense. That makes sense. Yeah. I also want to talk with you, Koos, about within campaigning, campaigners and activists can choose to use what we call insider strategies or outsider strategies, right? So I know you know what that means. Let me just explain that to my audience. Insider strategies, we're talking about citizen activists who decide that they want to try to influence formal decision makers, so whether that is governments or whether it is multinational corporations, or you name it, that they want to influence those by trying to be with them at the negotiation table during formal decision-making moments, for instance, when we make new policies or new treaties or rules, etc. While other activists push from the outside through sometimes high-profile public action and mass mobilization. Of course, Extinction Rebellion, tell me if I'm wrong, Koos, by the way, sees that it wants to be most present on the outsider strategy side. I'm curious, Koos, whether at the local level, that you're exposed to, whether there's ever discussions about what is the value of outsider strategies and what's the value of insider strategies, and do we ever as a local movement need to try to also apply insider strategies? What do you think?
I think as Extinction Rebellion, at least in Rotterdam, I mean, of course, we are mainly focused on tactics outside of the system. So, for instance, civil disobedience. But we also have a political strategy and change circle. And a circle just means working group, because Extinction Rebellion is structured in a sociocratic way, and then each circle has like a specific task and domain. So there's this one circle, political strategy and change, and they actually speak a lot with the local politicians and do a lot of lobbying, like come up with petitions. So there is actually stuff going on. There's like a connection to within the system ways as well. And I think in general there's pretty there's this idea within the movement that that we need both, and we need all different kinds of tactics. So you can do civil disobedience, but without the people within the system also advocating for change, it doesn't, like nothing's going to change. But if you have only people advocating within the system, they will probably just be ignored without pressure from outside. Example is another group that I'm a part of, Occupy EUR, where we occupy the university and demand a better university, and first and foremost that they cut ties with the fossil fuel industry. For many years, academics within the university have advocated for this change, for this making the university more sustainable and cutting ties and stuff, but they were just always ignored. And now since we have been doing these occupations, the university has been much more willing to at least listen to them, even though they still have not actually implemented any of the demands that we have.
I see. So you see a certain kind of a beginning of an opening up, and you're definitely saying that Extinction Rebellion also has both, wants to use both insider and outsider strategies. That's very helpful to know. I'm curious, to what extent at the local level, Koos, do you see Extinction Rebellion as a social movement ally with formal NGOs and nonprofits? Does that happen a lot? What's Extinction Rebellion's stance on that?
I think one of the, this is not on a local level, but more national level, because I think most of these collaborations with NGOs happen on a national level. I think a nice example is the Schiphol action back in November, which was a collaborated effort between Greenpeace and Extinction Rebellion. And I think that worked out really well because you just have like so many more people you can reach if you mobilize both through, like, Greenpeace is mobilizing and XR is mobilizing. I guess XR was more doing the mobilizing part because we are a grassroots movement and have more structures for that, and Greenpeace was more, I think Greenpeace, the fact that Greenpeace was with us helped maybe to get more media attention, because they're such a big name.
Yes. Yes, it's a good point.
Yeah, so, and another group we work together with, which I'm actually not sure if they're like an NGO, but they are more a bit within the system. Maybe it's Milieudefensie.
Right. In English, that would be environmental defense.
Yeah, exactly. And it's an organization that also that organizes demonstrations, but not so much civil disobedience. But we have organized demonstrations with them. They also do more of the petition kind of stuff.
Right. Yeah.
But we do collaborate with them, and I think that's valuable also with the relating it to the point that we just made, that you need both this within and within the system action and outside of the system pressure.
Right, exactly. Yeah, I think that's very essential. As we're slowly getting towards the end of our interview, there's at least another question I want to ask before we get there, and that is, there are some analysts who study social movements, and particularly those that engage in more civil disobedience and quote unquote radical activism. They say that that type of activism comes in spurts, comes in peaks, and then it dies down because it's difficult to maintain that on a long-term basis. What do you think about that statement? Both, let me, sorry to interrupt you, Koos, let me just specify, is that something both at the organizational level and for you as an individual activist?
I think first individually, of course, activism takes up a lot of energy, and it's actually now for the first time. I've now been really active within the organization since September, since the start of the academic year, and I can now tell at the end of the academic year that I'm getting a bit tired of the role that I'm in right now within the movement, because I'm a general secretary and I have to write notes and stuff and just do like work that is actually kind of boring. Like when you join an activist organization, you think like cool, radical action. And there's of course that, but then actually most of it, it's like organizing. It's just a lot of texting and doing and anyway. And I think I need a little break from that specific stuff I'm doing right now. But then again, I am excited to get involved with other activities within the movement. I think it's also a very personal thing, but I can also see that people kind of are very active for a while, maybe a year or a year and a half or a few months, and then they might be a bit less active, and then they might come back or they might not. So there is actually kind of this replacement of old people with new people again. And I think therefore it's really important that you also transfer the skills that you learn through your activism to others, to new people. And I think also one of our main kind of principles is that no one should have a monopoly on a certain knowledge. Like no one should be in a position too long, because then they will acquire all the knowledge and the movement will become dependent on them to do that thing. So in general, we just try to change positions so everyone is learning and people are replaceable. So people can also step out when they need to and regenerate. And in terms of regeneration, we try to, there's also a specific regeneration circle. So they organize fun social events, and after actions, they will organize debriefs so people can share their emotions and process. So there is this culture of well-being as well. Also at an action, there are always well-being people present whose specific task is to look out for everyone's well-being. So I think the movement is very aware of how taxing activism can be, and we try to take care of each other as much as possible. But yeah, it is not strange, I think, that people might want to take a break every once in a while.
Yeah, no, exactly. But it's very good that your local Extinction Rebellion has that vehicle of regeneration circles with the focus on well-being, etc., to help people maintain stamina. Well, Koos, I guess we're coming to the end because our time is almost up. So, first of all, 2 questions. Where can people find out more about you as Koos van Est and your part of Extinction Rebellion Rotterdam?
Yeah, so for connecting with me, people can follow my Instagram, which will be in the show notes.
Yeah.
And to see what's happening with Extinction Rebellion, the Netherlands, and Extinction Rebellion Rotterdam. We also have Instagram and Twitter accounts, which I'm sure can also be put into the show notes. And
Yes, we will do that.
yeah, then you can stay up to date what's happening.
Okay, that sounds very good. Well, I want to thank you for sharing your experience and also your observations and your perspectives. It's really valuable to hear directly from a climate change activist in Extinction Rebellion on the ground about how the social movement that you're such a part of, how it tries to balance all these different needs and interests and yeah, these interests. It's a very complicated affair. So thank you so much for your time, Koos, and for your insights. Thank you, listeners. Also, if you found this podcast stimulating, then be sure to check out other episodes of my podcast that focus on campaigning strategies and tactics, such as episode 18 with Paul O'Brien, formerly senior leader at Oxfam America and currently CEO of Amnesty USA, as well as episode 57, where we talk about shifts from transnational advocacy to transscalar activism. And you can find those episodes not just on my website, 5oaksconsulting.org with the number 5, but also on my YouTube channel. Subscribe to my email list and you'll always be the first to know when we air a new episode. And with that, this is Tosca, and I look forward to spending time with you on NGO Soul and Strategy next time.